I'm not a Japan tuber, but I love true crime and haven't found many well-done videos on Yakuza history, so when I visited the country, I knew I had to show off some of the sites. This is the headquarters of the Yamaguchi-gumi, now in their 6th generation. With roughly 3,300 members, Japanese officials say that not only are they the largest Yakuza family, they're one of the biggest organized crime groups in the world. But much like the Italian mafia, they'd tell you they're legitimate businessmen with a unique history rooting them back centuries. This heavily fortified home base is just north of Hankyu Kobe Line and Kobe's Nado Ward. From many angles near this neighborhood, and possibly from the second and third floors here, you have a clear view of the bay where the Yamaguchi family business began. Telling the whole story is outside of my scope, but here's a quick tourist guide. Begin at the Minato Ward in Osaka City, a stone's throw away from the cruise ship terminal. This entire ward was raised from the ocean and used in the rapidly growing trade business. Dockyard workers still live here, served by the Chiko Koyasan Shaka-in Temple, a small Buddhist shrine on the sea. Tucked behind the temple itself is a beautiful tombstone to Bunguchi, the brother of Hirokichi Yamaguchi, the first boss of this Yakuza syndicate. Bunguchi was contracted to handle the cargo ships of Osaka Bay, which might be how Hirokichi was introduced to the business world. Hirokichi Yamaguchi was born in 1881 in Owaiji City. From early February 1904 until autumn 1905, the Russo-Japanese War was fought, which Hirokichi served in. After being demobilized, he tried to find work in his hometown as a fisherman in the rapidly industrializing Osaka Bay before finally following his brother to Kobe. This was around 1910-1911. Then, around 1912, he began working for the Oshima Group led by Hideyomi Oshima, known as the boss of the canal. In 2 years, Hirokichi's stamina and work ethic had elevated him from port worker to site supervisor, reporting directly to the manager. But Hideyomi Oshima was no ordinary businessman. He was involved in entertainment, exactly the kind of entertainment you'd expect in an industrial port city. In those early years, the port was controlled by the Oshima-gumi, specifically Kano Kenji. He consolidated their operations and named his younger brother Hideyama Oshima the heir apparent to the organization. Crime boss Kano Kenji basically held Kobe in his hands. In 1915, Hirokichi Yamaguchi established the Yamaguchi-gumi to aid the Oshima-gumi. This went on for a short time, but soon Hirokichi's son, Noboru, was excommunicated from the Oshima-gumi for failing to make tribute payments. The Oshima-gumi could tell they were gradually being pushed out, and the new Yamaguchi-gumi began only as 50 men, with their business supplying labor, contracting men to work at the port. They also worked in rakugo, a form of storytelling and entertainment. This was wildly successful, and in 1925, the godfather retired, passing the title to his son, Noboru Yamaguchi. Hirokichi died in 1938 and is buried on this hill overlooking the port, not far from their modern headquarters. Before he passed away, his son had already begun training the third Yakuza boss, but more on him later. I spent a long while looking and couldn't locate the tombstone of the original boss, but highly recommend the Buddha statue here with an amazing view. Noboru branched the Yamaguchi-gumi further into the entertainment business than his father did, a trend that would be doubled down on by his successors. In addition to labor and storytelling, the second generation of the Yamaguchi-gumi included sumo wrestling and music production. He became a blood brother to Tamakin Senamon after a tea ceremony linking the sumo wrestlers of his stable to the Yamaguchi-gumi and to Noboru Yamaguchi himself. Now, Tamakin deserves a bit of a conversation on his own. He was born in Kochi City in 1903, where his grave now lies, mostly forgotten, beside a building near the highway exit. I'd like to talk a little bit about him because it was through him that Noboru Yamaguchi became so involved in sumo wrestling. Like Hirokichi, Tamakin was raised by a poor family, in this case farmers. When he finished elementary school, Tamakin was sent to work as a servant for one of the local prominent families, and by chance he met Tachiyama Minamon and his sumo troupe as they traveled around the country. I want to say right now, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing 90% of these names. I really am sorry. Tamakin was already a competitive child and loved sumo wrestling, but his parents thought it was the same love a child had for any sport that they would soon grow out of. Seeing Tachiyama's performance, he knew he wanted to follow in his footsteps. Initially, his father was opposed to this, but the prominent family that Tamakin was working for convinced him that the young boy would be an amazing fit. His first training was at Nishonoseki Stable, led by Master Kaizan II. Tamakin was an apprentice for 3 years because he was too skinny and needed to gain the weight. For years, he worked his way up the ladder. Always the underdog, he'd be covered in bruises and bandages after training until he began winning. By the time he'd climbed his way to the top, he had the attention of Noboru and his Yamaguchi Gumi, so much so that they held a ceremony declaring the two blood brothers. Before dying suddenly of appendicitis in 1938, he became the stable manager of Nishonoseki Stable. Because of his close ties to the Yamaguchi Gumi, any of his apprentices who found themselves in trouble in the Kansai region could count on, if they had the good favor of the Yakuza, finding shelter in this stable. This stable was created in 1911 and revived again in the mid-1930s, but closed its doors in 2013. Those who remained went to the Matsuguni stable, pictured here, not too far from the coast. 2 years after Tamakin's death, Noboru Yamaguchi would be badly wounded in a business dispute. He would die 2 further years later in 1942, making way for his successor, Kazuo Teoka, a famous man in Yakuza circles. Not only did Kazuo grow the Yamaguchi Gumi, he also added to the aesthetics of the organization as more than just a business. He brought them further into the realm of white-collar crime. Born in Miyoshi, the same island as Tamakin, it's impossible to emphasize how poor his family was. His farmer father died of an illness when he was a small child, and his mother worked herself to death just after he started elementary school. He was raised by his uncle, an abusive alcoholic, and his aunt, who treated him with nothing but coldness. By the way, I'm kind of zooming around his village right here. This is a 1,000-year-old camphor tree in the outskirts of where he grew up, and we're also kind of looking a little bit at the temple that belongs to his family, although I couldn't find any graves that belonged to his parents. Kazuo Teoka attended Hyogo Elementary School with the younger brother of Noboru Yamaguchi, a man named Hideo Yamaguchi. The two were good friends, and after graduating, Kazuo decided to go to Kobe with all the rest, working as an apprentice in the Kawasaki shipyard. 2 years later, in 1929, he punched his site supervisor and became a street fighter around the port, where he earned the nickname The Bear after his tactic of clawing at his opponent's eyes. Hideo recognized Kazuo's potential and brought him to Noboru Yamaguchi as a protege. For years, he acted as a bodyguard for Yamaguchi Gumi-affiliated wrestling stables and accompanied them on business trips until he was officiated into the ranks of the syndicate in 1936. However, in February 1937, Kazuo made his bones and spent years in prisons where he learned the finer details of how their organization ought to be structured. On that day in early 1937, the Yamaguchi Gumi confronted the Onaga brothers in the red light district about their disrespect to Noboru's father. Now at that meeting, Masakichi Onaga, the elder of the two brothers, lunged at Kazuo to defend his own brother's honor, but Kazuo grabbed an iron kettle and cracked him over the head with it. Seeing the younger brother, Hachiro, spring up to help his elder brother, Kazuo killed him with a samurai sword. Because it was a matter of honor, he then lifted himself up, walked to the police station, and surrendered himself fair and square. For this, he would serve 8 years in prisons around the bay. Reading and drawing a great deal of inspiration from Toyama Mitsuru's own group, the Ganyosha, that would come to define the third generation of the Yamaguchi Gumi. The fact that Kazuo Teoka was in prison for most of the war deeply impacted him. Behind bars, Toyama Mitsuru is known as the boss of bosses, or the Shadow Shogun, a reputation that preceded him across the island and imperialist political circles. As someone who influenced Kazuo and the Yakuza from behind the curtain, Mitsuru deserves to be talked about in his own right. Mitsuru, the boss of bosses, was born in 1855. His youth was spent shifting further and further to the right, beginning as a progressive reformer in the freedom and people's rights movement, but gradually embracing this Pan-Asianism. He traveled around the continent, building a movement that would aid Asian nationalists through militant activity. He met Sun Yat-sen in 1897, crystallizing his brand of nationalism in 1904 with the formation of the Manchuria Volunteer Army, also known as the Manchuria Righteous Army. To this day, the Manchurian Army of 1904 is still a mystery. Mitsuru and his supporters headquarters gathered bandits during the Russo-Japanese War and sent them to the rear lines of Siberia via the railroads. There, they would sabotage Russian positions and raid villages with a ferocity that the Japanese government still covers up to this day. Money would then be divvied up between the bandits and supporters of Mitsuru and his pan-Asian hyper-nationalists. In 1912, a revolt in China toppled the ancient monarchy, and Mitsuru accompanied the future prime minister to the newly christened Republic of China. Obviously, Mitsuru held a political influence that was unparalleled. What's more than that, he founded a great number of secret societies that would funnel money to and obtain blackmail on Japanese politicians controlling the country from the shadows. In 1915, for example, he met Rosh Bose, who fled to Japan after attempting an uprising in British India. Like Mitsuru, Bose believed in a greater Asia, but as an international terrorist, he had to be sheltered in Mitsuru's attic. By the middle of the First World War, Britain was demanding Japan release Bose, so Mitsuru had the idea to arrange a marriage between him and the daughter of a wealthy Japanese intellectual and businessman, Aizo Soma. These three men were the core of the local Pan-Asian movement. In 1924, Sun Yat-sen visited Japan, seeking a private audience with Mitsuru. He viewed Mitsuru and his comrades as the logical start point for his own ideals of a greater Asia, and drew inspiration from the freedom and people's rights movement, something that Mitsuru and his older friends had been a part of. He congratulated the Japanese on embracing industry and modernizing the country, but feared they were turning away from their natural Asian kingliness. By the time Sun Yat-sen was back in Japan, it was 1926, and like Bose, he had to hide in Mitsuru's house. A few years later, in 1932, a coup in Japan assassinated the prime minister. This was tied to supporters of Mitsuru, who was both too elderly and too popular to prosecute. In spite of his involvement, the prince requested him to personally meet with Chiang Kai-shek to negotiate the formation of a Pan-Asian state. This meeting never took place, and Mitsuru would die in 1944, just after the third boss of the Yamaguchi-gumi was released from prison, having spent his sentence eagerly reading literature tied to his movement and personality. Toyama imparted a lasting legacy on conservative political and business interests in Japan, not the least of which being the Yakuza. Kazuo also formed a militant secret society modeled after Mitsuru's society to protect the ports around Kobe and keep drunk GIs in check. Many within the Yamaguchi-gumi saw his efforts and called for his ascension as the third boss, which happened in 1946. By this time, the Yamaguchi-gumi had dropped to only 30 people. Kazuo realized this and reformed the group. Now, no drugs would be sold, and they wouldn't hedge their profits on gambling. Every new member of the Yamaguchi-gumi was expected to have a regular job outside of the organization and would contribute to the running of the gumi with their own checks. Their profits shifted to supporting the entertainment industry, sumo wrestling and music, as well as to working at the ports. As for Kazuo's part, he ran Koyo Unyu and was vice chairman of the National Port Cargo Handling Promotion Council. He lived in this house down the road from the Yamaguchi-gumi headquarters. Then along came 1960, a security treaty was passed to curb illegal activity. Many Yakuza flocked to Yoshio Kodama, an ultra-nationalist politician and formerly a rear admiral in the Imperial Japanese Navy. Remember, Kazuo was a protege of Mitsuru, that Pan-Asian ideologue who ran a number of secret societies. Well, Kodama had been a member of his Genyosha Society, probably the most well-known society created by Mitsuru. Before the 1930s, Mitsuru himself had sent Kodama to Manchuria, working for Japanese intelligence officers to crush anti-Japanese resistance. After the invasion of China in 1937, Kodama served as the personal bodyguard for Wang Jingwei. From then until 1941, he forged links between the triads and the Japanese, and by 1945 was one of the richest men in Asia. By the time Kazuo had to consider working for him, Kodama was a CIA asset. At their request, he engineered the Liberal Democratic Party, a right-wing political party that is still a dominant force today. It's the political party of Shinzo Abe. Kodama is buried here in the Tokyo metropolis. In 1963, negotiations for a merger with Kodama's ultranationalists fell through, and Kazuo pulled the Yamaguchi-gumi out, perhaps disliking the taste of CIA that Yoshio would bring to their organization. After this, Kodama led a Tokyo-centric group, while the Yamaguchi-gumi stayed focused on Osaka and Kobe and consolidated their powers there. Many mainstream conservative politicians that had previously worked with Kazuo's team now distanced themselves from the Yakuza, including Hayato Aikida, who served as the prime minister from 1960 to late 1964, rapidly improving relations with the US in the Cold War and distancing the conservative elements of his own parties from organized crime. Under the new leadership of Kazuo, the Yamaguchi-gumi took a two-pronged approach to their business. Members with legal businesses were forbidden from doing anything illegal, so now many mainstream businessmen who'd made a name for themselves with Yakuza support had a vested personal interest in protecting their leadership. The gang cemented their power until the natural death of Kazuo in 1981. At the time, the underboss, Kenichi Yamamoto, was in jail. The top lieutenants of Yamaguchi-gumi agreed to wait for his release to hand the title of boss to him, but he died of liver disease in early 1982. The Yamaguchi-gumi had already been through several bloody purges and wars, but the violent Yamaichi War would be their worst, following in the wake of Kenochi's death. This war began here at this apartment building. The lieutenants of the gang couldn't agree on who would come next, so they made Hiroshi Yamamoto provisional boss and Masahisa Takanaka the underboss. Takanaka was born in Himeji City and buried in the local cemetery overlooking Himeji Castle. I wasn't able to find his memorial, but a few photos do exist of it online, and the hillside offers an amazing view of the castle not far from the port. Kazuo's widow favored Takanaka for boss and expressed her wishes openly, causing anger among the majority of the Yamaguchi-gumi's lieutenants. Takanaka didn't want the position and only reluctantly accepted leadership to appease the widow's wish. Hiroshi Yamamoto reacted with anger and took 18 leaders and 3,000 men to establish their own branch of the Yakuza, rapidly dwindling the Yamaguchi-gumi. On January 26, 1985, Yamamoto sent a team of his supporters to assassinate boss Takanaka at his girlfriend's home, the G.S. Heim Dainiasaka Apartments, which we're looking at right now. While going to see his mistress, Takanaka, along with underboss Katsumasa Nakayama and one other member of the Yamaguchi-gumi, were all shot dead. A press conference was held at the home of Teoka, the Yamaguchi-gumi headquarters, and the group vowed retaliation. Both their boss and underboss had been killed by the rival Ichiwakai, run by Hiroshi Yamamoto. In the years that followed, 36 gangsters were killed, and many more were seriously wounded in an estimated 300 gun battles. The war continued for several years, and the Yamaguchi-gumi eventually prevailed. With the help of a neutral gang in Tokyo, peace was brokered under which the remaining defectors were allowed to return peacefully to the Yamaguchi-gumi. Yamamoto finally decided to retire, disbanding the Ichiwakai in 1989. On March 30th of that year, Yamamoto himself visited the Yamaguchi-gumi headquarters, accompanied by another Yakuza boss, to apologize formally. This ended the Yamaichi conflict. Now the Yamaguchi-gumi has been through many iterations, internal battles, and wars that are too complex to get into for a video that should have been more focused on historic sites. Now on their 6th generation, in 2015, Kuneo Inui broke away and founded his own organization, the Kobe Yamaguchi-gumi, very much at odds with the 6th generation of the original Yamaguchi-gumi Yakuza. They used to be based at 88-1 Shizuki in Iwaji City, but have since relocated to this compound outside of Kobe. This compound is shown here and also on Google Maps. Very recently, on April 10th, 2025, the regular Yamaguchi-gumi submitted a solemn oath to the prefectural police that they would end any conflict they had with this branch, and although still enemies, hostilities have apparently been resolved. Last stop on this tour is the headquarters of the Aizu Kotetsukai, which English-language Wikipedia claims was created in 1868, although it was dormant for many years. At their peak in 93, they had over 1,300 members, and their headquarters was based around Kyoto. At that time, they had more membership than the Yamaguchi-gumi. But in October of 2005, they formally allied with the Yamaguchi-gumi. Japanese Wikipedia makes their history more clear that the organization was named after Senkichi Osaka, an Edo period gangster. Senkichi's nickname was Aizu Kotetsu for the same reason listed above, and he's buried at this temple. After Senkichi died, the leadership passed on to his son, who passed away in 1935. After this, the organization went dormant until 75, when it was again revived. The real Aizu Kotetsu was about as rough a gangster as Kyoto ever saw, sporting over 70 sword wounds, many of them to his face, and missing quite a few fingers. The Aizu clan declared him the protector of Kyoto, and an organization was created in his image, which continues up to this day, allied with the 6th generation of the Yamaguchi-gumi.